Hi, everyone. Welcome to what has become the third installment in our ongoing reader series here at UC Berkeley Extension. My name is Jeff Metro. I'm the program manager for the Humanities Department at Extension. Now, I'd just like to go ahead and turn things over. I'd like to introduce Jennifer Cho and Yang Huang and our speaker and author today. Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Jennifer. I'm so grateful to you and Berkeley Extension. I took an advanced fiction workshop at the Berkeley Extension many years ago. I made some friends in the class and we formed a writers group. We had supported each other and critiqued our work for almost a decade. And I wrote several novels in the workshop. After I got published, I met wonderful writers who teach in the extension program. The classes at Berkeley Extension were important to my writing career. I'm so fortunate to have a conversation with Jennifer today, and I appreciate every one of you joining us on this beautiful day. I am Yang Huang. I have worked as a computer engineer at UC Berkeley for 15 years. I'm a fiction writer on my own time. My debut novel is Living Treasures. My linked story collection is My Old Faithful. This is my third novel, My Good Son. Recently won the gold medals for Novelist Book Awards, IBBY Awards, and IBPA Benjamin Franklin Awards.
Thank you, Yang. My name is Jennifer Cho, and I'm just so honored to be here with Yang Huang, whose work is so necessary and riveting. Thank you, Jeff, for organizing this event, and it's especially meaningful, at least for me personally, to do this during Asian American Pacific Islander Month. So thank you for creating space for this conversation. Outside of this, I'm a visiting assistant professor of English at Boston University, but I used to be faculty at UC Berkeley, so it's nice to find a virtual home through this event today. So I guess we'll give you, let's see, a little intro to My Good Son. I, again, think it's so riveting and honest in terms of how it takes us into the interior of the Kai family who live in post-Tiananmen China. I found myself not just only swept up into their lives as you unravel them for us so beautifully, but I really found myself falling into the depths of the Kai family's love and affection for each other. And so I might want to begin here by asking, or I guess dwelling on the title of this talk, My Good Son, the Power and Burdens of Parental Love. And I wanted to ask how you see these burdens transmitting between father and son in the novel, and perhaps what they mean for you personally as a writer, how you might see yourself carrying these burdens in the stories you tell.
Oh, thank you, Jennifer. The Mr. Tsai, his name is actually pronounced as Tsai. Okay, that's just a small thing.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if I should do a little reading.
Oh, that's right.
Yes. A little context.
Yes, absolutely.
So, I had a long writing journey, and I want to give you a little context about how I came into writing in this book. I remember when I first fell in love with literature. In the early 80s, I was a fourth grader in China and came across Victor Hugo's Les Miserables. It must have been excellent translation. The story was so vivid and gripping that the characters leapt off the page and became my imaginary friends. It didn't matter that I was a Chinese schoolgirl born a century after the book's publication. Those characters were more real to me than my schoolmates because their interior lives were on the page. I felt seen. My life became rich and full of color. The contemporary Chinese literature didn't nurture me. Not because they weren't good enough. So many of them were masterful, but they showed the tip of the iceberg and didn't reveal the whole truth. Only the partial disguised truth that could elude the censorship in China. Fast forward to the mid-90s, I immigrated to the States and worked as an engineer. I felt a bit lonely because I didn't think I belonged. I wanted to learn more about American culture. So I went back to school and studied literature and writing. I was becoming American, a member of the multiracial society, and I wanted to own my new identity as a Chinese American. I wanted to tell my stories, and I wanted to write English. I got my BA, MA, and MFA while working as an engineer. I never questioned if I would find my readers someday. I grew up in China and immersed myself in the Western literature in translation. I was drawn to the sensibility and the freedom of storytelling without the censorship. The characters are neither heroes nor martyrs, but seem to be normal people, rather fragile, like myself. When fiction tells the truth, someone was spotted like a friend. When I was young, Victor Hugo showed me a new world in stories. I didn't visit Paris until I was in my 40s, but I looked at every street and building and felt as if I had grown up in Hugo's Paris. I named my eldest son Victor. Over the years, I have encountered a lot of discouragement and rejections for my writing. That didn't stop me, not because I believe I'm talented, but I knew the stories are important and they need to be told. If I succeed, I owe my gratitude to the characters and their experiences. If I fail, I have work to do. It was never about me or my ambition. I came to the States 32 years ago. It was another time and different country than the one my children are growing up in now. Now there are deep division, crises, and rising anti-Asian sentiment. As a parent, I am worried, but I'm definitely not alone. I have a community of friends, neighbors, colleagues, writers, other AAPIs, and we show up for one another as active bystanders. As Asian Americans, we should not be satisfied with being part of someone else's story, some great narrative handed down to us. Let us, Asian American and Pacific Islanders, tell our own stories with our lives, our work, our families, our values, and our volunteer effort. It's our historical opportunity as well as responsibility. I conceived this story when I saw a strange image. A tailor spends his entire life making clothes for other people. One day, he puts on a long, form-fitting dress and walks in heels with difficulty. I asked myself, does he pretend to be a woman, or is he driven by something else? I am fascinated by how people work in the real world. A tailor reconciles his aspiration and artistic vision with the need to make a living. This book was set in Yangzhou. I had lived there for 9 years, from age 9 to 17, until I left for college. Some old memories came up when I wrote this book. I met a tailor when I was 16. My family couldn't afford to buy ready-made clothes. My mother sold most of our casual clothes, but one day she took me to a professional tailor in the neighborhood to make a wool jacket, my first formal wear. The tailor was a slender young man with a chiseled face. His wife was tall and, in my eyes, voluptuous. She was talkative and said that had a small bust, tiny waist, and big hips. Those were cutting remarks for a self-conscious 16-year-old. I realized that a tailor sizes you up without mercy. The young man was quiet and said little. I wonder what he thought of me both as a person and as a customer. I loved the jacket he made and wore it to death. It still fits me. I thought of him while writing this novel, and that helped me bring Mr. Cai to life. I will read the opening scene. My good son. If he could have exchanged a limb for a wish, Mr. Cai would have traded his gladly in order to unleash Fen, his only son, into a life where he could live and prosper on his own. Afternoon sunshine slanted into the northwest-facing kitchen, hot and stuffy with the carp soup simmering in a slow cooker. Mrs. had unfolded a letter on the dining table and saw a hint of blush coming to Fen's pallid face. He was lean and willowy, like a beanpole, towering above his mother beside him. Despite the height difference, the mother and son had faces looking strikingly similar, so in a way, the chiseled nose and high cheekbones were too pretty on Fen for his own good. Now that Mr. Tsai had the full attention, he read aloud a love letter written and signed by Fen to a young cook working at the canteen of his continuation school. I can't wait for the class to end and the day to go dark, so I can slide my hand under your apron to touch your dudo, the luscious satin I've ever stroked. What the hell is this? Mr. Tsai pounded the dining table so hard that his cup jumped up from its saucer. Fen shuddered and stepped back. Nothing, Dad. Mrs. Tsai reached out a hand to stroke Fen's hair, but he pulled away before she could touch him. This should teach her not to pet him like a baby. Mr. Tsai could only hope. She complained about unwanted attention, and I, your old dad, was called to your school to be given this. Mrs. Tsai swept the letter off the table. You tell me if this can be called a love letter. I only... Speak up. Fen's fingers shook as he pointed to the floor. When I wrote the letter, I only wanted to feel her dudo. It was made from a rare silk brocade embroidered with... On another day, Mr. Tsai would have indulged Fen, for his son had a fascination for silks and other fine fabrics, but not today. What do you take me for? Some old dimwit? Mr. Tsai ripped the reading glasses from his nose. I was a tailor before you were born. Have you ever seen me touching a woman's underwear when she tries on new clothes? Fen wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Mr. Tsai rarely saw tears from his son. Fen had inner strength that belied his fragile appearance. As a young boy, he had taught himself making rag dolls with scrap cloth. By the time Fen was in middle school, Mr. Tsai had made him quit his hobby until his grades were ranked among the top 30%. As a result, Fen had not made another rag doll, nor had he shed a tear about giving up. Now Mrs. Tsai sat at the small table where Fen usually took his meal after he failed the exam. He's really sorry, she said. Go study now, and dinner will be ready in a few minutes. Mr. Tsai was too angry to look at Fen and turned his face toward the windows. A magpie landed on the windowsill to comb his tail with its beak. Even the birds chose a season to mate, lay eggs, and raise their young. Why couldn't Fen remain abstinent for a few more months? You may not care about your future. Mr. Tsai heard the tremor in his own voice and cleared his throat. But you are indebted to your parents, who work until their backs break in order to provide for you. Fen stomped on the letter and kneaded the paper under his soul with vengeance, until the letter was torn in the middle. Mrs. Tsai had never seen his son so distraught before. If Fen poured half of his passion into studies, what might he have not achieved? So that is the first thing. Mrs. Tsai wants his son Fen to become an engineer, but Fen secretly wants to become a tailor like his father. Fen has failed his college entrance exams 4 times, and this is his last chance. Meanwhile, a young American man named Jude comes to a tailor shop to have a vest made. Mrs. Tsai seizes the opportunity to ask Jude to become Fen's financial sponsor so Fen can go to study at American University. Of course, his plan backfires. Mrs. Tsai discovers that Jude is a gay man and is helped to come out to his father. In the next scene, Jude comes to try on a tongue-sewed robe made of silk. Mrs. Tsai hasn't worked with a gay customer before and is a little nervous. Jude speaks Chinese fluently, but he's not so well-versed in the Chinese culture. Mrs. Tsai watched Jude button his tongue-sewed robe up to his chest. Bright sunlight tinted the silk fabric a high gloss finish and made it look almost sheer. It lent the foreigner a Chinese and youthful air, so that Jude's good looks appeared ageless, graceless, and genderless. There was one problem. With top clasp open, the collar enveloped Jude's neck like a cabbage leaf. You can't leave the top button open, Mr. Tsai said. Why not? Jude pressed a hand to his muscular chest. Perhaps his beauty lay in the androgynous features that Mr. Tsai only now saw for what they were. A tongue-suit robe is not worn this way. Mr. Tsai stepped forward to hook Jude's top clasp. That's much better. Jude gazed himself in the mirror and turned from side to side. The rope swung around him like a weeping willow. It's too loose for me. Jude peered back over his shoulder. That's the way it's supposed to be. Mr. Tsai retreated to the sofa. Tongue suits are loose-fitting. We aren't stingy with fabric. If we want a new tongue suit robe, we use the best material available, plenty of it. Jude hooked his top clasp. But the robe doesn't fit me. My body is lost in all this gauze silk. Look, he pinched the sides of his robe. I could be this big and wear it well. I'm 50 pounds short for your robe. Jude's complaint upset Mr. Tsai more than he had expected. If you know anything about men's tongue suit robe, you won't ask for it to fit you as tightly as a woman's stockings. Jude looked taken back, even a little hurt. Mr. Tsai was sorry that he had sounded unkind. A foreigner didn't know how tongue suits should fit, so he had to be patient and not mocking. Tongue suit isn't designed to show off a person's body, especially of a man. A tailor's job is to enhance a woman's beauty, but for men, less is more. A tongue suit fits a man when he diminishes in it and becomes one with his robe. Look, Mr. Tsai pointed to the patterns on Jude's robe. They're peonies and butterflies, creatures of nature. And you inside it, also a creature of nature. Only when you are immersed in the peonies and butterflies will you become one with them. Mr. Tsai took a handful of Hong Gongs. The silk is ginger and turquoise, the colors of soil and sky. The peonies are butterflies, scenes of summer. As you wear them on your robe, you become a part of the summer scene, Jude. That sounds nice. Jude pulled up his robe to his knees. But do I have to be covered from neck to toe? I'm a swimmer, you know. In summer, I'm in shape and tan well. Maybe a tongue suit robe isn't for you. Mrs. Tsai helped Jude to undress. In this book, the plot thickens as my characters take me down an unexpected path and surprise me time and again, not just with the actions, but also with the reasoning behind the actions. Later, Mr. Tsai meets Jude's parents, who came from Austin, Texas, to see their son in China. Mr. Tsai makes a bad decision by lying to them, thinking that his end justifies the means. Then he's caught red-handed, accused of bearing false witness by Ken, Jude's father. Here, Mr. Tsai tries to defend himself, or rather, help Jude in a roundabout way by pleading with Ken. You are a fabric store owner. I know you're expert in textile weaves. Mr. Tsai showed Ken the cloth in his hand, feeling its familiar weight. See how the warp and weft yarns are woven together. Chinese people think all things in nature are connected. In this light, a piece of cloth is analogous to a person's life. If your family nurtures you like warp yarns, your friends and lover may support you like web threads. One thread is nothing. Even the steel thread may be bent with my fingertip. Mr. Tsai tried to tear the curtain, but you only heard his fingers. He went on with a shy smile. After the warp and weft are woven together, the cloth becomes durable. A shirt on your back can last you a decade before it goes out of style. Mr. Tsai wrapped the curtain around his shoulders like a shawl. Imagine the resilience of a human fabric, if it is well woven. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Yang, for that beautiful reading, and also just walking us through the personal trajectory in terms of arriving at this novel and becoming a novelist in your own right. I'm so struck by your mention of wanting to give characters their own lives. And you certainly animate the characters in this novel with such vibrancy. I think I mentioned to you in an email or so that I missed the whole cast of characters once I closed the covers of the book. And I mean, their afterlives still sort of carry on beyond the scope of the novel. And so I guess I just want to maybe take it back to the question I jumped the gun on. I'm so sorry. I was so excited and enthusiastic about the conversation that I completely forgot the most important part of the talk today, which is your reading. But if we sit with the title of today's talk, My Good Son, Power and Burdens of Parental Love, I'm wondering how you see these burdens being interpreted differently or similarly between parents and children in the text. And you kind of pointed to this in terms of both the filial duty expected of children and kind of the sacrifice of the parents, but also how much of that is wrapped up too in following social conventions and pathways to success. And so I'll just kind of hand the floor over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer, for that very generous, your very generous reading. And I love your question. That makes me think a lot more about what story I was trying to tell. And they provide a fresh perspective and also make me think more about the historical background. The one-child policy in China has deprived the only children to have healthy sibling rivalry. So they become the sole focus of the parents and grandparents, which is a tremendous burden. It's hard to answer to all the expectations thrust upon you. And the only child is not free to make their own mistakes. We commonly think that parental love is unselfish. It's a biological need to protect and nurture the young. But there's also a social element because no family exists in a vacuum. For example, Mrs. Hai has a neighbor, Mr. Ouyang, who makes more money than he, despite being a less skillful tailor. Mrs. Hai especially envies his neighbor's daughter, Zhao, who is years ahead of Fan in terms of academic success. This kind of peer pressure causes great suffering for both parents and child. To me, this social part of parental love is not pure, but transactional, as you also mentioned. So Fan understands that his father loves him and uses that love to hold him hostage. His father's love is both pure and transactional. It's a whole package or a double-edged sword. Fan can rebel against the transactional love by jeopardizing Mrs. Hai's grand plan. Fan's pretty successful at that, but he feels guilty for squandering his father's pure love. As a writer, I want to depict that ever-present push and pull in the parent-child relationship. We do the right thing for the wrong reason and vice versa.
That definitely illuminates the pressures against which Fang is resisting, I guess, in a way, but also trying to honor in his love for his parents. And I'm wondering maybe where you see possibilities in the story for those notions of parental love to be revisited, perhaps revised, reconstructed. I mean, it might anticipate to the kind of work Mr. Hai does as a tailor and Fang's own interest in fashion design and tailoring himself. And so I'm wondering here if you could take us a bit deeper into how you see these burdens transmitting across generations.
Well, even Fan begins to mature after his girlfriend breaks up with him. He learns that his father is pushy, not just out of sheer vanity. Mrs. Hai wants to secure a future for Fan, and this is a fight for survival in a highly competitive society. It means more than material success. It reflects a person's values, where the heart is, and how a person can strive to live a fulfilled and dignified life. Eventually, Fen understands the stake and begins to share the burden by deciding to go to the trade school. But Fen's not ready to become a father, and he refuses to budge on that front. He pleads with Mrs. Hai for help. I see this softening as Fen's personal growth. He has agreed to become absent father. The child will become a constant pain point. It's both a retribution and reward for Mrs. Hai to raise Fen's baby. I'm kind of spoiling the story for you, but Mrs. Hai will spoil his grandson more than he does Fen, but he's not responsible for grandson's success as he once was for Fen's. I plan to write a sequel that Ye, who is named after his mother, will eventually be reunited with Fen. So Fen will assume his responsibility. Better late than never. There's a long break, but definitely the continuation of parental burdens or responsibility that Mrs. Hai hands to Fen when he's ready.
I'm so excited that there's a sequel forthcoming because, I mean, just going off the point earlier that I missed the characters upon finishing the novel, I get to meet them again. So thank you for letting them reappear in the next novel. And I was really sort of puzzled too by Feng's sort of easy disposability of little Ye at the end of the novel. Again, sorry for spoilers, but just the ease with which he banishes her and doesn't take responsibility for the children that he has helped create and with her in favor of course, sort of going abroad and pursuing his studies there. And so I guess to bring it back to the profession, the tailoring profession, and again, this personal inspiration, your own recollection, having worked with a tailor who used to fit clothes to your own body. And I'm curious about this line you write, because it's so exacting in terms of how I think you might be using the act of tailoring as kind of a metaphor for something so much bigger than just the job as it appears. And you write, quote, "Creativity might be an extension of one's sexual imagination." And as we learn, Mr. Hyde's very much into the sort of the traditional pattern cutting and tracing of the Tong suit style. And so I guess I'm wondering here if you might speak to how you see different acts of tailoring, sewing, assembling, and creating, working in the novel to sort of speak to larger themes.
Thank you. I love tailoring as a metaphor. I was obsessed with it, and I was obsessed with those people, as you can, you can understand. Before the tailor dresses you, he actually undresses you by taking your measurements. He knows your body's flaws so that he can camouflage them. A tailor can be your best ally or worst critic, which Mrs. Hai is to Fen at different times. He's both cruel and very protective of his son. I love that contradiction inherent in Mrs. Hai. Mrs. Hai's obsession with beauty, especially natural beauty, is also interesting. He looks down on disguise, makeup, and perfume. He's touched by natural beauty and genuine emotion. Despite all his flaws, Mrs. Hai is a kind person at heart and wants to do good. I like to think that the father and son are kind of stitched together through familial ties and the shared gifts for tailoring, as you mentioned before. That's a part of the reason they don't get along, because Mrs. Hai cannot stand it that his son is just like him and not better. Both father and son tell their customers less is more when it comes to style. Fen tells Caroline how he designed the elbow sleeves for her dress. You want to show some skin. Your forearms and neck are more appealing when they are partially covered. In this way, people's imaginations are stirred. So tailoring is intimate and precise craft, as a tailor imagines and creates the most appealing image in his mind. I call it a sexual imagination. Fan is more restless and creative than his father. I believe Fan is bisexual, even though he doesn't come out. There are hints throughout the book.
Detail is so revelatory that you read him as a bisexual character, somebody who's more fluid and flexible in his sexuality, that might not have been available to his father's generation. But correct me if I'm wrong. I know particularly Mr. and Mrs. Hyde's generation, they're dealing with an era when even premarital sex, and I'm quoting you in the novel, is considered criminal. So certainly desire for and sex with the quote other, like it's non-normative sexual behavior would not count any less criminal in that scenario. And so I want to think maybe about how you see these transgressive desires and illicit sexual desires playing into the relationships among different men and boys in this text, because there's a strange tension, I guess you could call it, between Jude and Mr. Hyde. They have these moments of physical touch and embrace and intimacy that he doesn't even show to his own son, Fang. So if I might read a couple lines here from your work, there's a scene when I believe they're saying goodbye to each other for a bit. But you write, Mr. Hyde breathed in Jude's scent mixed with his own perspiration. He kissed Jude's cheek and told him, "Take care of yourself, kid." Jude's stubble grazed his lips. And then I think earlier there's a scene when Jude actually kisses Mr. Hyde, as well as sort of the undressing and redressing that is involved in tailoring when he makes this suit for Jude. So I guess if you're reading Fang as a potentially bisexual character, where does his father fit into this? Because he also has a tendency to be homophobic and express complete resistance to the idea of Fang being gay, right? That it would all be not worthwhile if it turned out that he was gay like Jude, if Fang was gay like Jude, sorry, not Mr. Hyde, but his son.
Well, it is very interesting. There's a lot of interesting contradiction in Mrs. Hyde and Chinese attitude towards sexuality. Mrs. Hyde is definitely a heterosexual. He's just kind of ignorant about homosexuality. And that has to do with, Chinese attitude towards sexuality is just rather practical. This may come as a surprise. In China, homosexuality is not persecuted as long as you don't advocate for LGBTQ rights or any human rights. Then you are in trouble and will be hunted down. If you don't make waves, you are left alone and not harassed. There's no religious doctrine against homosexuality. People don't worry about sexual orientation throughout history and in literature, as long as you fulfill familiar duties. I know some rich gay men hire surrogates in America to have beautiful Eurasian children. This is considered a great achievement, not frowned upon at all. So in this context, sexual fluidity and diversity is not celebrated but widely tolerated. People don't dream of freedom, but try to live in the moment in big and small ways. Mrs. Hai has this attraction to Jude that's mostly comes from his attraction to beauty, and he has this idealized notion about how beautiful people may just turn out to be good and honest. And because his son doesn't let him get too close, he really treasures his little friendship with Jude as it grows, because it takes some work for them to kind of understand each other. But Mrs. Hai doesn't look upon Jude with desire or anything. He just kind of sees his son, or the part that he wants in his son, in Jude, in a way. So yeah, Jude is a young companion that rouses his curiosity and just makes him enjoy this interaction, and makes Mrs. Hai grow in a way, because through this interaction with Jude, Mrs. Hai will be more likely to accept his son, no matter what kind of sexual aberration that he could have. And he's imagining at this point, but he's kind of also perceptive. He's kind of on the right track.
Yeah, what I found fascinating is that it almost your plot requires Jude for Mr. Hai and Feng to draw closer, and it's also what incites Jude to come out to his family as well, to father and to stepmother. And as a connected question, I'm hoping to have a little more understanding too around the treatment of women's sexuality in the novel, because of course there's little Ye who's pregnant out of wedlock, and as we know, Feng leaves her to have these children on her own. And then there are whispers, maybe not whisper, at least Mr. Hai claims it's confirmed knowledge that Feng's new love interest, and forgive me if I do not pronounce her name correctly, Zhao, is it?
That's correct.
Okay. The father is able to sort of read her body while fully clothed, of course, but he can guess that she's not a virgin, she's sexually active. And in both scenarios, I think with Little Yin, Zhao, they're shamed for this transgressive sexuality, even though Mr. Hai seems much more accepting in a way of Jude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe, women's sexual freedom is also not celebrated in China, but quietly enjoyed, because women take their liberties in discreet ways. In My Good Son show, Mrs. Hai's first love was not discreet and suffered dire consequences. Little Ye is smart, but she's too strong for someone like Fan, who is afraid of her strength. Zhao is also strong, but she wears a velvet glove, so to speak, and is able to gain upper hand in her relationship with Fan. All of these women enjoy the sexual freedom to extent, but they have different ways to express their freedom, and some of which just works a lot better than the others. I think the reader might take those criticism from the people in the community a little bit too seriously, because these women are all very strong. They, as women growing up in China, girls growing up in China, and they have already encountered a lot of sexism and disparaging talks in every way, just about the fact that women and their bodies and their age. So the little whisper or little criticism, and it doesn't really mean a lot to them, and they can just brush it off. Of course, Little Ye's really got the hard cold treatment, but she is very strong. She goes behind Fen's back and try to accomplish her goal. So we need to take that into consideration, that despite having a very hard life, being treated this way, she also gets what she wanted despite Fan. And because it was impossible to win over Fan's support, in this way, she gets what she wants, without his support. In some way, it is a gain for a strong woman like her.
And I love that you characterize the women in this novel as strong and self-autonomous. Right? They sort of make sure they face the judgment of the men in their lives, but they ultimately make their own choices. Mm-hmm. And speaking of acts of love, because it's little Ye who sort of steps away from the relationship so as to give Fang space to pass his university entrance exams. I'm fascinated by the different variations across the acts of love in the novel. And of course, we're not speaking necessarily about sort of overt declarations of love as popular rom-coms have made familiar, but rather acts of love through gestures and support. So I'm thinking of how Mr. Hai, I keep saying the wrong pronunciation there, dreams of then passing his entrance exams and plotting to get American sponsorship at all costs. And then Mrs. Hai's just relentless feeding of the thing. Your descriptions of the food she's conjuring up in the kitchen are so lush and redolent, like the fresh carp stew and the hand-folded chive wontons. I really, as a mother myself, I felt that the passing of love from food to child was very palpable. But I wonder if you could walk us through how these acts of love, as you see them, breaking down some of the barriers to communication, maybe sort of the reluctances to express verbally.
I saw on your Twitter that you're ex-chef. So you know good food, and I envy your culinary skills. I really love to write about food and in fiction. So Mrs. Hai doesn't know English and relies on Jude being the translator. There's a language barrier between the Tsai and Darling families. And, Mrs. Hai really loves to feed people. And they are, these means of communication, food, fabric, and general goodwill. Mrs. Hai doesn't envy and is sympathetic toward the American father and treats him with greater respect than he shows his wealthy neighbor, Mr. Ouyang. We know Mr. Tsai, both Mrs. Hai and Mr. Darling, they are tradesmen. So in this sense, they're equals. They earn their livings by working with customers on personal level, regardless of a political or cultural backgrounds. Through Jude and Caroline, the Chinese and American fathers had persistent communication through various acts of love, even when they disagree. Finally, the two-piece dress for Caroline helps break down the barriers because both Mrs. Hai and Mr. Darling are practical-minded tradesmen. The two fathers have a lot in common, and they can transcend the language barrier.
What's really interesting about the last detail where the dressmaking for Jude's mother kind of establishes this new kind of intimacy is really neat, thinking about how you portray tailoring earlier in the novel as this very sort of repetitive act of patterning. And so I'm just thinking out loud here because I didn't pick that up earlier, but hearing you talk through that, it's a neat way to kind of think about how there is a a shape shifting to the act of tailoring as well, like as the novel progresses. So my next question asks us to think a bit here about how you're positioning the US in your novel. I think so often in at least popular representations of the Asian American or Asian experience, you have either this very like hyper orientalized backdrop of Asia from a long, long time ago, or you have this hyper futuristic backdrop of kind of a cyberpunk Asia. But I think in either scenario, what you see often are Asian characters or Asian American characters sort of emptied out of any sort of personality and subjectivity and personhood. And here you've really sort of given us animate, fully dimensional, fully feeling characters. And so I'm wondering how you're approaching the space of the US, how you're imagining it in the novel. I mean, ultimately, we do see Feng and Zhao go to the US to study abroad. And so that is their kind of end destination for now. At least we'll have to read the sequel to find out what happens next. But if you might be able to speak to how you're envisioning the US, especially because of the sponsorship that's involved with Feng studies.
Yeah, I hope we stop reading those exotic versions of Orient. Mrs. has very limited knowledge about America. His view is representative of his generation to regard America as a land of opportunity and a beacon of hope and freedom. So he turns to Jude in desperation because Feng appears to be a failure, but a father cannot give up on his son. Feng is a creative person and craves freedom, which is not a top priority for most people in China. In a sense, Feng was born into a wrong family and a wrong country to boot. But neither Mrs. Hai nor Feng knows this. They just muddle along until Jude comes to the door. Jude brings a prospect of a larger world, but in a way, it's also a small world with its own set of problems, as Jude struggles with his father's acceptance. So these people have some common ground, and the playfield is leveled for each to make his contribution to help others as well as themselves. This was a time when China and the US were forming the partnership in the shadows of Tiananmen Square protests and crackdown. Therefore, this sponsorship and kind of benevolence there, the times have changed and the world is more divided now. In this story, global politics is reflected in people's experiences, but does not dictate how they act. In some way, people haven't changed nearly as much as the politics. If you go to China today, these are still the people you are likely to meet.
Thank you for taking us through that. And most definitely our world has changed reading this novel. I guess, are we still in COVID-19 era? But just thinking about how borders were closed and continue to be regulated, not just within China, but between China and the US. So I think yes, while it was difficult for him to get sponsorship and a visa, it seems like there's a bit more fluidity in his world, at least. Mm-hmm. So moving to, I guess, reflections on how your work seems to fit into or even resist what you see happening in Asian American literature and culture right now. I'm thinking about what you perceive to be some of the more pressing issues that Asian American writers face right now.
To me, some of the most illuminating, enduring issues are deep personal stories, family, sexuality, individualism, immigrant experience, racism, poverty, class, and everything else that concern other communities, writers, and identities. I'm so happy and proud to see a broad range of diverse stories are being told. A great many Asian American writers win awards, recognition, and popularity. Each voice adds to the conversation, so no single writer needs to represent the AAPI community because all writers and voices do that collectively and individually.
And I think your answer to it speaks to the limits of that broad categorization of AAPI, because there's really not a lot of breathing room, even within the broadness of that category, to take into account, those individual and culturally specific experiences, identities, memories. And so it's really exciting to see more Asian American artists and writers being represented in the growing oeuvre of work there. And so compelling too, when I think back to a profession you made earlier in the talk about how it was so important for you as an Asian American writer, taking ownership of your own stories and being able to produce your own narratives.
Yeah, it is a good time, and it's so inspiring to hear all these stories. And we're going to see more. Really look forward to all the great books.
Yes. And you hinted at a sequel. We get to see Little Ye again, thankfully. I wonder, without any spoilers, of course, if you might be able to speak a little bit more about that, and or other works in progress you might have under your belt, what we might expect next from you.
I finished another novel titled Oasis. It's a love story and climate fiction. I hope to find an agent and a publisher for it. It could take a long time. I'm also at work on a new novel, a sort of sequel to My Good Son. I'm at the very early stage of planning. I kind of don't want to give away too much because it could all change.
Right, absolutely.
But I cannot, like you mentioned, I cannot leave those characters behind. They keep bugging me to come into my consciousness, and I want them to take responsibility. I think that's the main thing.
I wanted to pose maybe one final question before we can move to Q&A from the audience. And it is connected to this obligation, shall we call it, or responsibility that you feel to give life to your characters in their lives as you imagine them. So often within the AAPI community, creative writing and sort of other artistic avenues aren't necessarily valid or viable career choices. I know from my own experience, it was always a doctor, a lawyer, and there's nothing else beyond those two choices. But for those who might be exploring creative writing or a creative career outside of just writing, what advice might you have for them?
I started writing as a working adult in a second language and encountered a lot of discouragement and rejections. I consider myself a blue-collar writer. So if I could do it, you certainly can, if you want it enough and if it's meaningful enough to you. Today, writing is not a glamorous or lucrative career for most people. But I want to encourage people who decide to take the plunge. There are many paths leading to a writing career, and life happens along the way. Have no fear and don't be discouraged, because you will be tested over and again in every way imaginable. Appreciate your life, learn from it, and enjoy the people who cross your path. So if one day they end up in your stories, you will have genuine respect for them. They stand on their feet as living and breathing people rather than become caricatures in your imagination. Be true to yourself. Finish that book if that is important to you. Never lose sight of your goal. Like skiing, you need to look down the slope. It's a run. Don't get hung up on individual turns or be mortified by how spectacularly you fall. You can always push yourself up, catch your breath, and start again. Be patient. Be good to those who support you, and keep your sense of humor. One day you will earn the respect from your readers.
Thank you so much for that. Jeff, might we turn it over to the audience for any questions?
So one of our questions is, I've noticed that you say, I think, or I believe when discussing characters. When you write, do you plan out all your characters and scenes in advance, or do you make rough guidelines and have your characters write their own stories? I actually had a similar question when I was listening.
I usually start with some personal traits or quirks. For example, Fen is left-handed. He's vegetarian. I just started with that. And then I asked myself, what does it mean to be left-handed and vegetarian? And what kind of consequence is that for a person in a society that requires high conformity? So his father tries to correct his left-handedness and always try to feed him fish, other protein, and so he could be strong and like everyone else. And how does a person take advantage of his situation, being the kind of person he is? Then I just follow the character on their journey. I don't plan everything out, but I have a rough idea about where the story might end up. I just don't know how I might get there. And this way, the characters, I leave room for them to grow. So they become stronger and stronger. Eventually, they can rebel against my convenient plot and just change it and turn it into leading me to a new path. And it was just very heartening to see not just the action they take, but also the reasoning behind the actions. And that's when the characters become real for me, when they are not what they imagine them to be. And when I feel that I'm proven wrong, I feel like the story has landed. They have become real. And they tell me who they are. They teach me something I don't know about them. So I really treat them with great respect. I give them a lot of room, and so they can become real for me.
Thank you. We do have one other question thus far. So please, if anybody has questions, go ahead and write them in. But we actually have gotten this question a few times in past events, and I think it's something more of a procedural, people just curious about writing, and that is to say, if one were to write a book, how does one go about finding a publisher? What does that process look like?
It depends on the genre, obviously. If it's nonfiction, you usually sell it with a proposal. So you may need to find an agent first and sell a proposal. And for fiction, you have to, most of the time, you have to finish the book. You have to polish it and perhaps rewrite it many times over before you go out to look for an agent. And it's possible that you may not land an agent. For me, I didn't use an agent for this book. I entered a contest that you can find them on Poets Writers website. There are certain contests, but the odds are pretty, the odds against you. But if you entered enough contests, and you may eventually find your path. Every book has a different path, for children's book is also different. So you probably you should not have publishing in mind when you start the book, most of the time, unless you write some high concept book that it is really, really timely and there's a taker already. Most of the time, for fiction, you need to finish it and look for other books that's is a similar genre or have a similar audience and see how they get the books published. And it's very helpful to follow their journey. It's very specific.
I recall from my experiences trying to get short stories published years ago, you're gonna knock on a lot of doors, you're gonna send a lot of emails, and you're gonna hear no many times. And it's important. I think you mentioned earlier, it's important to sort of keep at it and persevere.
Mm-hmm. And I heard, some journals, they reject your first submission anyways. So all these rejections also get your work read in a way, and they serve a purpose. You need to get out there and just submit. Mm-hmm. Eventually, you will find a path. Every book has a different path, and for a writer, your different books have different paths. So I think you need to believe in your story and make the best as it can be, then just go out and try to find that path, forge it. and some people self-publish too, and that's also a way to get your work out there, to get it read.
So we have another question that really just someone wanted to know if you could explain a little further what you mean when you describe yourself as a blue-collar writer.
I'll have a full-time job and I have a family life. That's, itself is pretty, it's very high priority, right? I have 2 kids. So writing's it's not the only thing. It's not the thing that I spend most of my time on, but it's one of my most important tasks in life. It gives me, gives my life purpose and focus, and I pour all my passion into writing. It is difficult, and so I treat it as a great privilege to write.
Thank you. Another question that we have that's come in is, what are some of the lessons that you've learned from your characters in this story or other stories, and how does that affect your future stories?
I learned that people are never what they seem. Fen is very fragile, but he's a very strong character. I love to make all my characters strong. They're so strong. They always rebel against me and they always win. So that's what I want. I don't want weak characters that I imagine who they are and they actually turn out to be exactly what I imagine. That's a disappointment to me. Like, why do I even spend this time, discovering their humanity? Because I just want to know their humanity, because they're not me, but they are also, we're all humans. I'm sure I can understand them. And if they can teach me, then I think a story is just a great success. Whether it gets published or not is a great success if I learn something about other people's humanity and my own as well. So yeah, people are never what they seem. Mr. Cai seems to be, bad-tempered. He's so demanding, but he turns out to be very forgiving of other people's mistakes. He takes up this grandson, it's a huge commitment. And they're always more than what you imagine they are, Mrs. Cai also, and she seems to be this nice person, but she does something underhanded and behind Mrs. Cai's back, and she gets her way. And little Ye has this agenda that just confounds everyone, and it probably surprised herself as well that she actually pulls it off. So I just, Jude, I bet Jude doesn't imagine that he could accomplish all this with, a little scheme. It started on the wrong foot, but it ends well. And he might even find true love in China. Who knows? So I think it's just delightful to see the characters. They just take off. They do their own thing. And they're always more than what you imagined. So I think the biggest lesson is that don't think you know everything. Leave them a lot of space, let them grow, and be open to that. in order to be open to that, you need to be extremely honest about your own limitation. You only know some traits about their life, and you probably know a little bit history about their life, but you don't know everything. You are there to listen and to discover and kind of tend to them when they can't go on. You just give them a little strength. Or if they really hit a wall, you probably want to give them a little help, so they don't get so stuck, and help them along, and they will reward you with a great, beautiful, fascinating story that you can look at with some pride and joy.
Sort of in that vein, another a question from the audience here is about sometimes writing characters that are too similar to family and friends, and they don't want to offend anyone when they show up in their stories, that kind of thing. But you were just talking a lot about how characters, if you give them the space to grow into themselves, I'm sure while someone could maybe start out very similar to a fun uncle or something like that, they would possibly grow into something more. Is that right?
Yes. Oh, if you write fiction, you shouldn't worry about offending them so much, I would think. But of course, I understand that you always think there's some, they're peering behind your back and look at what you're typing. And I guess I'm someone who has a little advantage in that, because I read in English. The people I grew up with, they don't read it. They don't necessarily read it. And my parents definitely can't. It gives, makes me feel a lot safer that way. But I learned after I published a few books, I learned that people always think they're better than the characters, than the characters you portray, even when you portray, them as, basically, they don't ever think they're villains. They just think they are definitely better than what you portray. And I think there was a study I read before that, like, scientists give people pictures, their own pictures, and they just think they look younger, better, fitter than they look in their own picture. I thought that's pretty ironic. People just think they are better people, and they actually, most likely, they will not recognize themselves, or even if they do, they will not think it's them. So I don't think writers should fear too much about exposing your friends. You can always buy them a beer if they're really offended, but
that does go a long way.
I doubt you will come to that. I think, when people are satirized, they may even laugh at it. Who knows?
Another question we have from the audience is, you talked about your work as an engineer. Do you have any tips about making time to pursue writing or your other hobbies, especially something as long-term as a novel?
Actually, writing is my only hobby. I think you have to limit your hobby. I obviously love to read and watch movies and, art, but I will not even call them hobbies anymore. They just, kind of help me write, or I try to think them that way. So I guess limit, you really need to set aside time to write. I usually write on the weekend, and holidays is a huge commitment. It's very difficult, but you need to find a supportive environment. For example, your family, you need to tell them that you need to write and you need your time. Find your space. It can't just be a desk behind a locked door, and make sure that door is locked for the 2 hours or 1 hour that you need it. But I think you always need to have that mentality, but do forgive yourself if your kids need you and you let them in, and just don't be too hard on yourself, but do finish that book if it's important to you. And I believe if you're motivated enough, if the story is important to you, you will find some way to finish that story. It may not be as polished as you want it to be, because you will need to set aside more time to polish it. You might even need to go away to finish a last stretch of the work. But just do as much as you can. But one thing I would definitely say, don't wait. When I was young, I wanted to go back to school to pursue English and writing. People told me, "Oh, you're an immigrant and you're a woman. You really don't have the luxury to pursue what you want. So why don't you work and retire and raise your kids and family? Retire, then you can pursue writing as a hobby." And I didn't listen to them, of course. But later I learned it's actually not possible. Um, I have known people who are so talented and they're at the age, that they don't have these obligations, but they absolutely have no drive to write. uh, Life would just beat that out of you, you know. And I also have heard that writers, when they have this very hectic life with kids to raise, with full-time jobs and sick parents to tend to, and they still write books. But once all of these things are done, they have no reason to write anymore. The drive is just not there. I wouldn't call it inspiration because, inspiration seems like a very lucky thing, but I would call it drive. You need to feel driven by something in your life. When your life is so hectic, maybe you really have a great need to express yourself. These stories want to come out. When you have nothing to do, like during COVID, when we have during lockdown, we have all this time. Like some of us read a lot, but do everyone write a lot? It's not just the resources. It is you need to feel what's in you. Listen to your heart.
Sort of piggyback on some of the things that you said. There was some of the best advice I've ever gotten on writing was that you have to treat it as a second job. That's sort of the dedication that you're looking for from yourself. And also writing is rewriting.
Yes.
Writing is revising.
Yes.
That first draft is just the first hurdle.
Yes. I don't think it's a second job because it's not it's not an obligation, but this commitment, definitely. It's not an obligation. I actually don't necessarily get paid. I think it's a different job. I think it's a mission. Like for me, it's a mission. To me, it's like community service. I want to tell these stories. My stories, obviously, but it's AAPI stories. It's just the stories about living, these years, this life, being an immigrant. And it's just a very important mission to me. It's just completely different. I think that kind of opens up more space for me to create. If it's just a job, another job, it feels very exhausting. And, because actually sometimes family feels like a job, but during the good times it doesn't feel like a job. It feels like also like a mission in life. I think you need to enjoy what you do, and because all these parts make the whole you, and that's kind of writer you are. So definitely find a space for your different roles and your different passions, so you can carry on and don't wait.
That joy that you create in the text too, I think it's it's infectious in a way. I mean, there's so many moments when I was reading the novel where I just was so excited to see what would happen next. And I almost felt like I shouldn't be there in some of the rooms with the characters because, they're exchanging secrets and they're scheming and plotting these, grandiose plans, unbeknownst to the other people around them. And so I really felt like invited into these characters' lives. And I think the joy of reading was certainly there as well, which I'm so glad you persisted in your writing because I got to experience that.
Thank you. And I feel privileged to be there to eavesdrop on them. I just can't let them go. When the writing is really going well, it's actually really difficult because you are opening up and, to see these aspects of this humanity that you probably weren't paying much attention before, but now you're really seeing it. And when writing's going well, I kind of feel those characters more real to me than people in my life, because I am, really in their life. The interior lives are on the page. I'm just all there, like with people in life, you still have distance, and it's a healthy distance. You don't necessarily want to know what goes on in people's mind. It could be, quite a burden. But with them, you just gladly follow them and watch them reveal themselves. And it's great that you kind of understand, that part of them as it's also you.
Is there ever such a thing as over polishing or over editing a draft? I think it's the end all be all question is when is a work really done, right?
Oh, actually, there is.
Yes.
There is. During the developmental edit for this book, I got 5,500 comments. And it was absolutely overwhelming. I got 13 pages of single-spaced global comments. Of course, 2 pages were praises, but there was still a lot to process. And they just focus on all these details. It took me 3.5 months to do the last rewrite. Initially, I accepted like 90% of the comments. I just did a pretty close rewrite of this, based on specs. Then I reread my work and I took out 10% because they just don't fit. I actually wrote an essay about revision process and it's in the millions. If you go to my website, yanghuang.com, you can find my essay that's in the millions. That made me think a lot more about writing, rewriting, and revision, and when you should stop. So for me, I think the first draft is like building a house, right? You just put on the foundation. Then you finish that house. You put in the windows, doors, rooms, and then you can walk in it. But the last developmental revision is not like a house. It's just kind of like performing a surgery. It's just very minute work. And I was so surprised by the amount of work and the level of precision it requires, because we're not looking at the big picture. We're not looking at how you get people from point A to point B, but you just fine tune all these plot points and the characterization, put a very fine touch on this. You write up the metaphors and the plot threads. So this is so technical. It's like performing a surgery, and it gives you a headache toward the end. And if you spend like too much time doing that, eventually you're gonna doubt yourself. You're gonna even question this story because you're looking at this. You're looking under a microscope. It's a completely different perspective. So at a certain point, when you start to doubt yourself and even doubt the story, I think it's diminishing return, and that's probably when you will stop. But for me personally, I think other than the developmental edits, I usually stop when the characters become so real that they rebel and they just become someone else. I think the story is finished. Story has landed on the ground rather than just in my on my writing pad. They become real people. I stop there, but the other edits, I think you will need certain editors. They need to have a vision about what this story is. So I guess don't take all the comments and feedback as they are, because you need to protect the integrity of your work. And to that end, a little bit of flaw is okay, actually, but you still need to have your story. Don't let it be so polished that you actually don't recognize them anymore, or they lose the edge, the spirit, or they lose that weakness for you.
And I suppose on that bit of excellent advice, we should probably close for the day. I just wanted to once again thank you both for coming and being a part of this. And this was a really great discussion. And I loved how much we got to dive into character in the process. And I'm looking forward to reading the book. You didn't spoil it too much for me. Don't worry about that. But
Thank you. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jennifer. I'm just so grateful to you. And
so thank you so much. I'll carry this conversation with me for a while.
Yes. So thank you again, everyone, for coming. If you are interested in starting to write yourself, or if you're interested in anything involved in writing, we have programs within the humanities in creative writing, professional writing, technical communication, and even copy editing. And if you have any questions or things that you want to talk with us about, go ahead and just reach out to us at extension-letters@berkeley.edu. Anyway, thanks again for coming, all of you, and I hope you have a great day.